Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I am Ted, and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Ted.
Joe said there's some beautiful people out there. Man, there's a lot of them, too. Good heaven, there's a lot of them. But it's wonderful to be here. You know, it took a lot of people like you to share with me, so it enabled me to find this beautiful sobriety in this program, Alcoholics Anonymous. Mary and I just come off a vacation to California. I think this is a wonderful way. What could be a better way to spend it here at this conference to finish it out? I heard a lot of good speakers since I've been here this weekend, and we have another good speaker coming up. I haven't heard him before. He does a great job. So why don't we just let Clint share with us in his own way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. My name is Clint, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Clint.
And I'm delighted to be included here in the 25th conference in Kansas of Alcoholics Anonymous, 25th State Conference. The power of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is something that I'm more aware of all the time, I think. I have enjoyed this conference very, very much. I'm very impressed with the way that it's, I think that the committee and the group that are working on it have done an outstanding job. And I know how much effort is involved in putting on a conference like this, and I applaud that effort. I think you've done a wonderful job. Yesterday, Dale and Bernie met me at the airport, and we've been having a few laughs since then. It was kind of interesting because they've been working like heck, as everybody else has on this conference, and they took me over to the hotel and helped me check into the room, and the hotel had a little cup over there set aside for me that commemorates this conference, little coffee cup that somebody told them to give to me, and there was the basket of fruit in the room. And Bernie watched all this, and he said, finally he said, I'll be damned. You just got here. I've been working my butt off for 3 days. Nobody even said thanks to me. The way it goes, Bernie. I don't usually get nervous about talking at these things, but last night I had a dream. I don't know what triggered it, but I was, I guess Bernie and Joe and I were in the back talking over here, and I don't even remember my dreams as a rule, but this one was kind of what had happened. It wasn't as if I died and gone to heaven, but these three guys were in that dream. I looked out and saw something that was apparently heaven scenes, and I watched, and all these people were walking around out there. They seemed happy enough. I was talking in my dream to some authority figure. I guess it was St. Peter. I don't know who it was, but I saw a guy, and I said, that looks like Dale coming over. And they said, yeah, that's, and I said, well, who's that with him? And he had some scruffy, nasty-looking little midget with wine sores all over him, handcuffed to him. I said, is this heaven? He said, yeah, Dale damn near didn't make it up here, and for 5,000 years he has to walk around with that mess on him. And I said, good heavens. And then I saw that Bernie coming across there, and he was strapped to some huge, ugly thing. And I said, what happened? He said, well, Bernie just almost didn't make it up here, and so instead of sending him down below, we sent him up here, but he has for 10,000 years to walk around with that thing there, and I thought, man, that's cold. And then I saw Joe, your speaker last night. He was coming along, and I said, that's Joe. I love Joe from Texas. And he said, that's Joe. I said, who's that with him? And he was walking along with Raquel Wells. And I said, I like that. That's wonderful. But I said, it's kind of funny. Dale and Bernie been working like heck all that time, and Joe he's a nice guy, but really, why is it they have to, with those people, and Joe can walk around up there strapped to Russell Wells? And he said, yeah, tell them you didn't make it up here. I've had a lot of fun since I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. More fun, I can assure you, than I ever had before. I was out here along the river this morning. It's a beautiful area here. And I saw those guys out fishing Sunday morning, and I'm out there jogging along, and it's unlikely, I'll tell you, for me to be doing anything that requires vertical attention to anything around me on Sunday morning. I saw somebody sleeping under one of the bridges out there, and I saw the whole thing. We're very lucky, I think, to be here. I feel extraordinarily fortunate to be numbered among the people that are members in good standing of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm glad to be here, and I welcome you. And if you're new here today, if this is your first experience in an AA conference, or if this is your early time in AA, I hope very, very much that you find the things in Alcoholics Anonymous that we have found here, because it's an extraordinary way to go. I'm 44 years old. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 29, and since the 14th of August, 1966, I haven't had a drink, and I'm just a drunk. I'm just a drunk. And I was living in a garage when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous in Glendale, California, with 3 other guys, and I never saw those other guys. I just crept in and out of that garage late at night because I didn't want to run into anybody. I didn't want to see the landlady. I didn't want to... You have a hearing? All right. Up and talking to this one. Is that... Can you hear me? Is there a hearing? Well, that'll take care of that. All right. How are we doing? Is that better? My name is Clint. I'm an alcoholic. I had a dream last night. I'm glad to be here, is what I've been saying. Thank you very much, Bob. And I thank you for including me in this conference. Alcoholics Anonymous is the most important thing in my life. There is nothing that's more important in my life than this program and this way of life. Because without it, I'm nothing. I'm nothing at all. Without it, I live in a garage at best. On my good days, I get to that garage in Glendale. Well, there isn't really any reason that I should have gotten there. Not really. Some people have stories that are tragic, and you think, well, no wonder they drank. Some people have some kind of an emotional quirk that makes it impossible for them to function in the world or to integrate into society. And I'm just a drunk. And I'm a drunk because I'm allergic to alcohol. I got an attitude problem. I've got the standard mix of things, but I grew up in a home that produced other people that were not alcoholics. I have an identical twin brother that is not an alcoholic. Grew up in the same home that I did. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I often agonized over why me and not him. Why did I have to be the one to catch this deal? They suggested to me that maybe it was environmental, and I thought back on that home, and it was kind of a goofy home that I grew up in, but my little brother, my little sister, my twin brother are not alcoholic, and they came out of that home. And they told me, suggested it might be hereditary, and I thought about that, and I know that if it is, that's okay, except my identical twin brother should have caught it too. And he's one of these people that just learned all his lessons the easy way. When I was getting thrown in the Glendale drunk tank, he was graduating with honors from college. I mean, he's a real drag, he is. You know? He's one of these guys that learns all his lessons the first time. You know, he's just... he told me a few years ago, the first time I met Frank M., who was the speaker Friday, was in Palm Springs. And that same weekend, my brother was down there in California from Portland, where he lives. And he and I got to talking about alcoholism. He attended the roundup that year. And we were talking together and having some laughs, and he told me a story that was just a spine-chilling story to me. He said that when he was a freshman in college at the University of Utah, he had a little trouble. Now, when they say a little trouble, and we say a little trouble, we say, well, I had a little trouble and I came to AA. That's a little trouble. He said he had a little trouble, and what he explained he meant by that was that he was late to class a couple of times. I said, it takes what it takes, Carl. And we couldn't pay the house bill 1 month or something like that. And one of the older salts in the fraternity house took him aside and said, Carl, I guess you are able to manage these crises pretty good in your life. And Carl said, yeah, I can handle it. He said, did it ever occur to you that there's maybe an obligation that you have to yourself to anticipate these messes before they arrive and take some preventative action so when they get here it'll be life will be a little smoother? Carl said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you just anticipate, for example, that you have to get up in the morning or that you'll need money next time or something, it's no problem. You just anticipate the crisis, and then when it gets here, it's time. And Carl said, no kidding, and he wrote that down, and he's been living like that ever since. He's one of these guys that mows the lawn, you know. He eats breakfast. Now, I know some of you did that this morning, but that's because you're just showing off at a conference, isn't it? Really? I'll tell you what kind of a guy my brother is. He's an identical twin of mine, and he fastens the seat belts. Oh, I don't think he does it maliciously, but he does. You know? Just to make me look bad. I was always ashamed of our home. The home we grew up in was kind of, well, we moved a lot. It wasn't a home. We just moved a lot. My dad was a drunk, and we moved. We lived on the wrong side of the tracks wherever we moved, and I was ashamed of our house, wherever it happened to be. In Alcoholics Anonymous, I've learned to talk about how I feel, and I think that a good deal, as was said last night, about the identification process that takes place discusses how we feel about things. And how I felt when I was growing up doesn't have anything to do with alcoholism. It just seemed to be part of that problem that was solved when I began to drink. Because the booze was an answer to what was going on in my life at that time. And the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has helped me come to terms with who I am. It's helped me come to terms with my past, how I felt about things. And it's helped me come to terms with who I am today. And in effect allows me to live in the world feeling welcome and loved. Comfortable some of the time, a lot of the time. It has allowed me to learn to live a day at a time without taking a drink. Alcoholics Anonymous is not helpful at all if you want to stop drinking. If you want to somehow learn to live so you don't have to start again, Alcoholics Anonymous is extraordinarily helpful. And that's always the problem anyway, really. We can stop drinking, but we can't ever get to the point before, at least I never did before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew I was going to go again. I knew I was going to go again. I just have to. I think that's part of the terrible remorse that I felt. I'd look you right in the eye and I'd say, I'll never do it again, whatever it was. But I know, as soon as I get the money together again, I'm gone. I'm gone again. I know that. And that's an awful feeling, but that's just the way I have to live because I cannot stand to live any other way. And I guess that was as painful as any of it because I was ashamed of being ashamed of her. I just knew that was bad. I knew I should be proud of her. And for some reason or other, I wasn't. The dog embarrassed me, for God's sake. But it had anything to do with our... And my brother just didn't react like that at all. I remember in Denver, in the 8th grade, we moved to Denver, and we lived on the wrong side of the track there, as we did, and town we lived in, but that year they trucked us across town to an area where the rich kids lived, because the school in our area was full and they wouldn't take any more students. And sometimes after football practice, we'd get a ride home with somebody's folks in their Cadillac or Chrysler, and I'd never let them take me down there where we really lived. I always made them let me off about 6 blocks away because I didn't want them to see that house we lived in. I'd be glad to run 6 blocks so they wouldn't see that place we lived in, because I was ashamed of it. I wanted them to think we lived up on the hill a little bit where they had lawn and paint on and glass in the windows and that stuff. And if my brother was in the car, he would say, no, it's down here about 6 blocks. And he'd let him get right in front of that place. And he'd say, that's it, there it is, right there. And I go, oh, God. No, the one behind, yeah. I asked him about that, too, when we were in Palm Springs together. I said, didn't it ever bother you to have those people see that rat hole we lived in? You know what he said? He said, I never accepted the responsibility for the condition that place was in. What the hell is that? I had another problem, and the problem was that I'm guilty. We went to church all the time. My mother made sure we went to church, and I sat there in the Church of the Air in Billings, Montana, and had that minister lay the wood to them. And they can do it. It's sort of a Southern Baptist kind of a fundamentalist evangelical thing, and they can sing along. And sometimes I'd want to go down to the front and get saved with everybody else on Sunday morning. I just almost seemed like it was bad, but I could not bring myself to do two things. I couldn't believe what they believed, and I couldn't admit that I didn't believe what they believed. And I was caught up in all of that. And it seemed like it'd be real easy if I could just believe what they were talking about there. And they talked about love and faith and hope, and I don't want to imply that they did not. But what I heard was hellfire and brimstone. And the questions around our house seemed to be largely connected with the life after death, and mostly about punishment. My dad used to, his question when he was around, and he was gone a lot, but when he was around, he used to say, when are you going to be a man? I said, I don't know. My mother used to say, where are you going to spend eternity? I don't know. Have you found God yet? No. What will you do when you meet your Maker? That was one she liked. What will you do when you meet your Maker? I don't know. I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. I mean, he just go through the book until he finds my name and it's all over with. She'd say, he holds you in the hollow of his hand, and I always hoped he wouldn't spot me there. I just said, no, give me one of those. Those questions, incidentally, don't seem to have much to do with a day at a time that I've learned to talk about here in AA. But there they were. So I had that guilt going, and I'm guilty at the gate. There was a couple other problems. One had to do with a song that Peggy Lee was singing about the time I got to AA. I'd never heard it put into words before, but I have had the feeling all my life. It didn't stop just because I got to AA. It followed after I got to AA too, and it's that feeling of, is that all there is? Is that it? There's got to be more to it than that. I mean, when my mother died when I was 14, and I stood at her grave, and I thought I should be feeling something I cannot feel. These people are grieving, and I'm just in neutral about this death, and I resent the fact that the attention is off me for a while. Really tacky feelings, and I didn't like them at all, but there they were. My first son was born when I was 19 years old. I didn't want that either. People said congratulations, and I thought, for what? I don't want to be married. I didn't want to marry her the day we got married. She told me she was going to have a baby. So the day we got married, she told me she wasn't, after all, going to have a baby. Yeah, but I married her because the invitations had all been sent out, and, you know, what the hell. And then in a year we did have, and I didn't want to be married. Is that all there is to having a son? Is that all there is? Christmas night, after the gifts have been opened, and my grandmother insisted we fold the wrapping paper up and put it back in the drawer. That'll take some of the joy out of things, I think. Is that all there is to Christmas? It wasn't really the paper or even the gifts. It wasn't that the gifts were not what I wanted. It wasn't that they were scroungy. It was not what they were, but I'm not going to bring that up. I don't want to... There's a promise to Christmas, and nobody had fulfilled the promise again this year. I don't know what the promise is, really, in specific terms, but people have been talking about this for weeks and a couple of months, and here we are. And you're left with the feeling, is that all there is? Got to be more to it than that. And Peggy Lee in that song says you might as well keep on dancing and break out the booze. That's the way it is in life, and I couldn't accept that. I could not accept that. And there was another problem, and it was the problem that when I found out or was told that I had a lot of potential, I quit. I just folded up the books and put them away because who needed to study with all that potential? I decided at some point along the line that life was pretty much a matter of living up to my potential. I should be operating up here, and I operate down here. And life's mission seems to be to clean up my act so I can do it the way I should be doing it. Now, all of that is so ill-defined, and all of that is loaded with such buzzwords that it's impossible to do anything with it except imagine goals that can't even be. Somebody offered me a drink. Now, I didn't know why my father drank. I thought he drank so he could be meaner than he could otherwise be. I didn't know what it would do. All I knew was that we weren't supposed to drink. And as Joe said last night, that makes it more interesting. There were a lot of things we weren't supposed to do. You can bet you there was a long list of them in that hellfire and brimstone house of ours that we weren't supposed to do. And I had tried those things, and they were all interesting. And that's why, and I don't think that, I drank for that reason at the beginning. That first drink was because it was, I ran into a friend of mine not long ago. He'd been out camping, and he had grown a beard. And I said, gee, that beard looks good on you. And he said, yeah, I don't like it. And I said, well, why don't you shave it off? He said, well, I can't. And I said, why? He said, well, I was up with the kids in the hills, and we camped up there for 3 weeks, and I came back down, and I had this beard going pretty good. And my wife took one look at me and said, shave off that beard. And he said, I can't do her now. She took all his options away, you know. So he's going around with that itchy thing. It looks okay. He thinks it looks ugly, but he's just punishing everybody. And that's the way we are. They say that Adam and Eve went after that apple in the garden, not because they were just nuts about fruit, but they weren't supposed to, you know. And so I don't think the idea is necessarily alcoholic. They should have forbidden them the snake, and they'd eaten that damn thing and saved us all a lot of trouble. Maybe I don't know. I love that drink, though. You know what that drink did for me? Close that gap. I didn't care about my mother. I didn't care if the house looked awful. I didn't care if my brother was getting better grades or worse grades than me. I didn't even think about my potential. But mostly, I didn't have to say, is that all there is? Because after about 3 of those drinks in that Quonset hut, I thought, okay, now then, now I've got a secret. And I know where it is. I know where it is. And that was the way it was. I was 17. And from that moment on, whenever I could drink, I drank. And by the time I was 22, I'd been married for 4 years. I'd gotten a college education, borrowed a lot of money from her father. Had 2 sons, had been accepted to school at the dental school at the University of Oregon, and had crossed over whatever line exists between alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinking and become an alcoholic. And I was 22, and she threw me out because I drank too much, and I went to dental school for 2 years, and they threw me out because I drank too much. It was, the problem in dental school was mostly in the clinic. When I drink, I shake pretty good the next day. I had found pills by this time, and so I took Dexedrine and Dexamyl, and that makes me shake even more. And I'd show up in that clinic on Saturday morning, supposed to be doing something to somebody, and I wasn't feeling well most of the time because I got drunk on Friday night. And Friday night is my night to get drunk. That's what I do on Friday night. I got drunk every other night of the week, but Friday was mine, and I just got drunk. I couldn't even feel guilty about Friday, but it made Saturday morning rather colorful there in the clinic, and I'd be dropping instruments, and they don't like it much to be sitting there with their mouths wide open in a chair and hear you say whoops. That makes them... So it was a source of comfort to a lot of people when I got thrown out of dental school that year. The sign outside of the post office in Portland, Oregon said, "The Marine Corps builds men." And I thought, okay, now. And so I went back to Quantico, Virginia. And I went through their officer candidate program, and I got commissioned, and I spent 3 years on active duty, and for a while that uniform helped. It was a buffer between me and whoever. But I spent a lot of time, too, standing in front of people's desks trying to explain why I drank so much. Got a letter of reprimand, and then another, and then a fine, and then another, and they asked me if I wouldn't like to resign my commission for the good of the service and to avoid trial by court-martial. I stood in front of the commanding general at El Toro, which is the Marine Corps Air Station in California. I think we break our own hearts in the process of all of this nonsense. I loved the Marine Corps. I really did. I didn't like it in dental school. I didn't like it being married. And when those failures came along, it wasn't devastating to me. I liked the Marine Corps. They have a way of motivating people, and they motivated me. And I wanted very much to be a good Marine. I really did. It was a challenge, and it was something that I could do. And when I was on, I was on. I was an instructor at the Non-Commissioned Officers Leadership School at El Toro, and that's kind of a West Coast show place for Marines, a spit and polish place, and you have to really be Johnny at the rat hole to stay on board there. And I wanted very much to be there. I was pleased with the fact that I was asked to be a faculty member there. And I loved the pageantry of it, and I loved the idea of it, and I had the feeling that that was really wonderful. I mean, I had, for the first time in my life, some sense of success. And here I am being asked to resign my commission for the good of the service and to avoid trial by court-martial, and it was not a happy day for me, and I did not get there because I wanted trouble with the Marine Corps. I got there because I'm a drunk. That commanding general at El Toro and I had several sessions where I stood at attention in front of his desk, and he read fitness reports that had been written by my superiors about me. And at first those fitness reports said things like, Lieutenant Hodges is an excellent officer, except when he's drinking. And then later they said things like, this officer consistently fails to live up to the low standards he has set for himself. That second time I saw the general, he told me there wasn't any room in the Marine Corps for an alcoholic. And I couldn't believe he was talking about me. I was standing there at attention with my shoes shined and my brass polished and my hair cut, and I was squared away, and I knew I was squared away, and I knew an alcoholic is a guy that lives under a bridge and has chili on his chest and wears a top coat all year long and is about 3 days older than a tree. And I'm too young, and I'm too this, and I'm too that, and I can't be an alcoholic, and here the general. And it was a sad moment in my life, because when he finally dismissed me, I left his office. I did an about-face and walked out of that office. I knew 3 things. I knew I wasn't an alcoholic. I knew he was nuts if he thought I was. And he's a 2-star general. And I also knew one more thing. I knew I needed to drink real bad. And that's the way it was. I got a bottle of vodka and put it under the seat of my car and drove out the gate, collected my salute, and went into the orange groves down a long dirt road and turned around so I could... I went out there for 2 drinks. I didn't go out there to get drunk. Elaborate precautions for 2 drinks. But if I'd have wanted to get drunk, I'd have taken bourbon. I took vodka. Leaves you breathless, you know. I heard somebody say that it also leaves you penniless, friendless, and homeless. I got out the orange groves many times after that, just for 2 drinks, and never got out of there. Wake up at dusk with the bottle half gone, scared to death. Moved into the BOQ, a second marriage failed. And that's the way it was. I finally got out of the Marine Corps. I stole blank discharge papers out of the squadron safe because I knew they'd give me a bad discharge. Joe pointed out last night that we just don't know truth from fiction, and I had no idea what was going on around me. I moved to Glendale. They gave me an honorable discharge, mustering out pay. I put the money in the bank. The bank gave me some checks, and I guess I thought it'd all come out even. The checks lasted a little longer than the money did, as it turned out. I lived in an apartment for a while and made a pretense for a few weeks of looking for a job, but then I knew, why bother? Why bother? Now I didn't have any restraints. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a commanding officer. I had no obligations, and I drank the clock around. And I got thrown out of that apartment, and I moved into the car. And then into the garage. And there I was, shuffling down side streets. The beginning of the truth happened in kind of an odd way for me. I was walking down the side street in Glendale one morning about 10 o'clock making the run. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't sober. I'd just been drinking for a week, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I needed a drink. I was dressed. I imagine that my voice sounded bad. When I've been drinking for that long, my voice gets really bad. And I discovered that if I go in and ask for a drink or order a bottle in a liquor store, that they look at me funny. And then I found out that if I spoke for a while, spoke out loud, counted to 100 or whatever, my voice would straighten out enough that I wouldn't get a lot of attention when I ordered that drink. And so I was probably walking along talking to myself. A woman was coming toward me on the sidewalk, and I made a mistake. I happened to look in her eyes just as she passed me. There wasn't any big incident, but I saw in her eyes a look of pity and disgust. And she told me more than I wanted to know. I mean, many people had told me I shouldn't drink. Commanding officers, judges. I'd been in the Glendale drunk tank many times by now. I'd lain in the cell there in the county jail and said, if I ever get like that guy in the next cell, I'll do something about my drinking. Wives, fathers-in-law, bosses, commanding officers, policemen, judges, everybody I ever came in contact with told me I couldn't drink very well and I shouldn't drink at all. And I knew that they were overstating the case out of some personal motive to keep me from having fun. So I discounted what they said because I didn't know the difference between truth and fiction. But this woman looked at me, and she was a total stranger, and she couldn't have cared whether I lived or died, and she looked at me in that way that people look at us. Incidentally, I have not seen that look since I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But she gave me that look, pity and disgust. And then she was gone, and I was gone, and I got my bottle and so on, but I couldn't get that look out of my mind. And that was kind of the beginning of the truth. I was selling encyclopedias in those days, door to door, when I could get out of bed. A bail bondsman had given me that job. And I woke up one morning in that garage. It was just like any other morning I'd ever spent there. It was, there I was in my little room. It was a double garage and been cut up into 4 rooms, and I had a little cubicle there with a linoleum floor that your feet stick to as you walk across. I forget about that little room sometimes. I just can't hold the memory of how it really was. But a couple of years ago, I was on a 12-step call in Los Angeles, and I found the room. It wasn't my room, but it was the room. And there the guy, and he had the same thing. I took 2 steps into that room, and my feet stuck to that linoleum, and that vomit and the wine and the beer and the vodka that had been spilled on that floor made it sticky. He was laying on the single cot that those rooms have, and there was a light bulb on a cord coming out of the ceiling, and there was a basin, and there was a toilet down the hall. And there we are. And the odor was the second thing I recalled. They do get ripe, those little rooms. The mattress goes bad is what happens. One night I was laying in that little room about 4 o'clock in the morning. The window opened out onto what had been the driveway, and a car pulled into the drive just to turn around about 4 o'clock. And the lights flashed through that window onto the wall, and I went under the bed because they were there. I don't know who it was that I thought was there, but whoever comes after guys like me at 4 in the morning had arrived. You know? And I lay under the bed until first light. And I don't live like that today because of God's grace. That room was a nasty little place, a place that I could not even think of as a sanctuary because I never felt secure there. I couldn't get drunk enough to feel secure there. I never had any laughs in that little room. But I got up, woke up in that little room one more time, and it was just like any day had been. There was a bottle of 10 High under the bed, and part of it was gone, but I drank the rest of it. And I got up and I shaved. I cut myself shave, and I had to show up at work. It was the 7th of July. I had started drinking on the 1st of July because I'm very patriotic. I want to get ready for the 4th of July. And I remembered nothing of that week except one event. I was dating some lady in those days when I was sober, and when there was somebody that would go to a movie with me or something, and I remember showing up on her front porch about 9 o'clock one of those nights, and her 10-year-old daughter came to the door and took one look at me and said, "There's old drunk Clint again." And so I guess I had appeared at her door a time or two. I went over to the office where I was supposed to be selling encyclopedias, and the guy that I worked for, the bail bondsman, said, "Where have you been?" And I figured he knew, so I said, "I've been drunk." He said, "For a week?" And I said, "I suppose so." "What day is this?" And he told me, and I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to take you someplace today, Clint." And I thought he might take me back to jail or to the county hospital or to Camarillo, which is the laughing academy out there. I kind of hoped he would. I figured they'd find that brain tumor I had if I would have given my left arm for a brain tumor in those days. And about noon that day, he and another guy put me in the back of a car and drove me across Glendale in a hot Wednesday. We went around behind the laundry and up a long flight of stairs and into a little room. And in the back of that room was some tables and chairs around them and 10 or 12 men and women sitting there. And they poured me half a cup of coffee, and I sat down with them. And nothing in my life has been the same since that day. Nothing in my life has been the same since that day. I was lost. I was a lost pup. I had no idea how sick I was. I didn't have any idea that I would be here 15 years later. I got drunk once more after that. I got back to Alcoholics Anonymous on the 14th of August, 1966, and from that day to this, I haven't had a drink. I stood in front of that judge in the Glendale Municipal Court many times and said, "Guilty, Your Honor," and got taken back to the cell or worked out a way to pay the fine or something like that. I was a complete failure in every department of my life. I did it all on merit, I'm proud to say, unassisted. One of the nastiest things I've had to learn in Alcoholics Anonymous is that my life is my own fault. But in the same vein, I've also learned that I don't get what I deserve. I get what I choose. Today I chose to be sober. I don't deserve that. But here we are. And it doesn't matter whether I deserve it or not. I get what I choose. And I'm glad to be here this morning with you. The journey since that day that I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous bears some comment. at 29 years old, selling encyclopedias and living in a garage, I was not exactly at the top of my game. And I lived in that garage a while. And I had a job change I got, so I was selling encyclopedias. I moved from that, and I was selling imprinted ballpoint pens and calendars. And I'd call on service stations around and say, I can put your name right here, Andy. Andy Shell Station. Won't that be dynamite? Right here on the calendar with a pretty girl. And it wasn't much fun. But it was a living. Sometimes I'd get done at the end of the day and go back up to that club in Glendale, and Barbara, who ran the club, would take one look at me and know I was really discouraged. Sometimes she'd say, I didn't think of this until years later. Sometimes she'd say, Clint, Ralph just ordered a hamburger and then he had to leave. He paid for it. Can you eat it or shall I throw it out? I didn't snap to that for a long time. I love that, Barbara. She'd stick a mop in my hand and say, that linoleum out there is getting weird. Do the cups. We painted that place one day. I kicked over a bucket of paint. I washed a lot of windows. I went to a lot of meetings. I love it in AA. I loved it then. I love it now. First time I ever trusted anybody was in connection with something that happened in AA. It was kind of strange. I'd been sober 6 or 7 months, and I was sitting around that club on a Monday night, and some people that were going to an H&I meeting, that were going to go take a meeting to a hospital, a mental hospital, came in. And they were laughing and having fun and a good time, and I thought, gee, that's wonderful. And one of them turned to me and said, you want to go with us? We're going to go down there. And I said, yeah, I'll go with you. And it made 6 of us all together, and we were able to get into one car, and we drove down to this mental hospital, and we parked in the parking lot, and suddenly it hit me as we pulled into that parking lot. This is an incredible ruse. 6 of us are going in. Those 5 are coming back out. And my very next thought was, I can outrun every one of these old fools. And then I thought, if they think I need to be in there, I guess I do. And we walked 100 yards across that parking lot into that building, and the walk was a long one. And we found the little day room, and we sat down in there, and they brought in the patients, and we had a meeting. I read chapter 5. I did nothing else but sit there, and in an hour we stood up and held hands and said the Lord's Prayer, and the people with bathrobes and liver strapped to their torsos and the paper slippers walked out. And I thought, well, now they'll come and process me in. And we stood around for a minute, and then we all walked out and walked back across the parking lot and got into that car, and I slept in my own little room that night, thinking, I guess I do trust these people. I guess I do. My early life in AA included going back to jail for a day for checks I'd written while I was drunk. I was put on probation for 3 years. Didn't have a checking account the first 5 years I was sober because I really didn't think I could handle it. I really didn't think I would do very well with a checking account. But I learned to do some funny things that I was told to do here. When I was 2 years sober, my recovery took another little turn because I moved to West Los Angeles and got a sponsor. I asked a man to be my sponsor that seemed to be fairly serious about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. His name is Clancy. He's my sponsor today. And I remember going to him one time with a problem. My problem is I just hate my ex-wife. Boy, she's a pain, I tell you. She's just really awful. And I want to know how I'm going to deal with all that, and when is she going to shape up. And he told me that, something I'd heard before, but I had never heard it before. He said if you want to change how you feel about anybody, you have to change the way you treat them. Well, I'm looking for something with a little more zen in it, if you don't mind. He said, how's that child support going? I said, what? When she shapes up, maybe. I was supposed to send her child support, of course, and I did. About a week late, or half of it, or I'd take it over there in person and tell her how to spend it. You know, I'm a shortcut artist, and I like to find that line and kind of walk along. He said, you got to do it right. You got to do it straight. You got to take it off the top every payday and send it to her. He said, if you can't go over there without getting cute, put it in the mail. And I thought, I wouldn't have thought of that. And he said, if you can't get it over there in the mail, get yourself another sponsor. And I said, oh. So I had to add one more money order to my list when I went to the bank. God, they hated to see me coming. I'd have 12, on payday, I need 12 money orders. And I go, They'd make them out for me. Now I had one more, and I had the envelope with her name and an address on it and a stamp on it. And I had to put it right in there and get it mailed right there. It was a good thing they had a little mail slot in that bank lobby, because if I did any thinking about it, I was in a lot of trouble. Those tellers were really patient with me. Once in a while, one of them would say, Mr. Hodges, if you had a checking account, you know, it'd only cost you 10 cents to write a check, and we have to charge you 35 cents to do these money orders. And I'd say, I know. Or if I was feeling kind of ornery, I'd say, you know, when I write a check, it costs me about 4 days in jail and several $100s, and then they get busy writing for money orders. I want to follow that theme because I began to send her that money. No more than I was supposed to. No more often than I absolutely had to. I just did it as required. I completely separated the money from going over there and picking up my youngster. I mean, it was a matter of hatred with this lady. I would drive down the freeway and the thought of her would come into my mind, and I would start my number, and she's going to say this, and I'm going to say that, and she's going to say this, and I'm going to hit her, and, you know, and just, I'd be 4 off-ramps past where I wanted to get off, and I just really get into it. And I hadn't been doing this for more than 6 months, and I'm now driving down the freeway one day with a kid that I'm sponsoring, and he's screaming about his ex-wife. And what he's saying is that she's a bad mother. And I didn't know whether she was or not, but she probably was not. But it seemed like a good bag to get into, so I got into it with him, and we were wailing away. And then it occurred to me, that lady that I used to be married to may be a big stinker, but she's a wonderful mother. She really is creating a marvelous home for my son, for our son. And it was the first positive thought I'd ever had about her since years ago. And then what had changed? Nothing. Except I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And later that year, she called me up and she said, could you bring the money over a little bit early? It was Christmas time and she needed it. And I'll be darned if I didn't find myself going over there a week early to give her the money just because she needed it. And that's not like me. I'm not what you'd call a compulsive child support payer. I can, you know. But I hope I don't soon forget what happened that night. She lived in Santa Monica, and I was still living in Glendale, and I took that money over there and gave it to her without comment. Spent a few minutes with my kid telling him what the plan was for the weekend, and we agreed to play ball together or whatever. I walked down the steps from her apartment that night, and it was early in December, and the air was kind of crisp, and there was some Christmas music, and there was some decorations out on the street already, and it was a nice evening, and dusk was there, and darkness was falling. And I felt more like a man than I had ever felt before in my life. And there isn't enough money in the state of California and Kansas to buy me that feeling. There isn't enough booze around to make me forget it when I don't feel that way. And all that had happened was that I had done what I was told to do. I had made some amends and met some responsibilities, and there was a little segment of my life that was not painful anymore. Not that it was completely healed, not that it was completely put to rights, it was simply not painful anymore. And that's the action of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it has worked time and time again, and I think it's critical that nothing really turns on what I believe here, nothing really turns on how I feel here. The thing that seems to be so critical is what I do or don't do. I don't think that doing the wrong thing will get us drunk. I think refusing to do things around Alcoholics Anonymous is very dangerous. And so I like to stay involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a chance, after I got done selling those pens and doing all that stuff, I sold dictating equipment for a while, and then I sold a little computer, and then I sold carpets, and I'm not a bad salesman, but my heart was never in it. And I knew there were some people having a lot of fun in how they earned their living, and I wasn't having much fun with it. I was okay, and I learned to do it. I learned the discipline of showing up every day, and the discipline of living within my income. I didn't know how to do those things when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I should have known, but I just didn't know how to live in the world when I got here. And I learned to do those things here. And I learned to do them because the people that I had decided to run with in Alcoholics Anonymous cared enough about how I felt to teach me those things. The day came, you know, I was always so afraid that if I got saved, they'd send me to China to be a missionary like they did my uncle. And so I didn't want to take step 3 either. Turn my will and my life over to the care of God, off to China. But the day comes, I think, for me, for every one of us, where we come to a point. Abraham Lincoln is supposed to have said once that he had been driven to his knees many times by the firm conviction that he had no place else to go, when his wisdom and the wisdom of those around him were insufficient for that day. And I got to that day, as we all do, I think, in our sobriety, and found myself on my knees in my little apartment in Santa Monica. You take it. I'll tell you, you may run me to China, but if I continue to run the thing, I'm going back to the Glendale drunk tank. And I assumed that China couldn't be a whole lot worse than the Glendale drunk tank. And so I said, you got her. And you know, the funny thing about it, he didn't want me to go to China. Wanted me to stay in Santa Monica and pay child support. That's right. Nothing that fancy for me. But I kind of expanded that later on and came to know that this worked in other areas of my life. I had such a narrow idea of God. I had my grandmother's idea of God. God is very, I found that one of the interesting things I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous is that while we're all God's kids, he doesn't have any grandkids. God has no grandchildren. I've got to work out my own deal. So somebody suggested to me that I was sniveling about not liking my work, and they'd say, what do you want to do? And I'd say, I don't know. I know what I don't want to do. Somebody said, this higher power that you're beginning to trust might just be able to provide some answers if you take off your pack and allow some, and tear up that list. They said, what do you know about what you don't want to do? You know, that list of things that I was just never going to, and I'm glad I tore it up because what I do for a living today was on that list, or would have been if it had come up. And I was told to keep an open mind and just kind of chug along and not take myself so seriously and not very much longer after that, 3 or 4 months, I'm on the back of a truck helping somebody move. An Alcoholic Anonymous member was moving one more time, and we all help him move. And another guy was holding down the same refrigerator I was on, and he poked his head around the corner and he said, Clint, you ought to go to law school. And I never really seriously thought about anything like that. My immediate reaction to it was, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I remembered, I'm going to keep an open mind about this thing. And I began to look into it, and I checked it out, and I talked to the committee of bar examiners, and I spoke to some of the people at schools there, and I wrote for transcripts, and I did this and I did that. And I found out you could do it. It could be done at night, 3 nights a week. It takes 4 years. I remember going back to him. I said, you know how old I'll be in 4 years if I go to law school? And he said, how old will you be in 4 years if you don't go to law school? He wanted to know that. That was in 1971. In 1975, in June, 176 of us had started. 46 of us were over at Whittier College in Los Angeles, graduating from law school. A lot of AA members in that amphitheater. Eddie Regan was there that Joe talked about last night. And it was quite a day. It was quite a day because I can't do anything for 4 years, you know. And I knew the priorities were going to tighten up. AA has to come first, and then the job and the payment of bills and the other responsibilities and the marriage and what about the night before examinations when somebody asked me to talk or participate in a meeting? What am I going to do then? But you know, those problems resolved themselves. I didn't have to compromise Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was the only member of AA in that class, and 2/3 of the class went away someplace. But the sea anchor that I had, that's Alcoholics Anonymous, gave me a safe haven to go to when the crazies were on me. And I remember toward the end of that time, I got in a bad grade in an evidence midterm, and I was just tired and overwrought and upset, and I just knew that that bad grade signaled that I was never going to make it. And I sat in my sponsor's, I haven't thought about this for a while, I sat in his living room that night after I got that bad grade and wept, and he put his arms around me and comforted me. And a few months later, I was graduating from law school. And then I had to take the bar examination in California. That's a rather colorful experience. But for me and for the likes of me, just filling out the application to take it got kind of weird, because they wanted to know things like where I'd lived since I was 16 years old, you know. That's a lot of addresses. 2 weeks here, 3 weeks there. In the Pontiac for a while, that's hard to put that down. Have you ever been arrested for anything other than a minor traffic violation? There's one for you, and they leave 3 little lines. I put C attached page right in the middle of it. Were you ever the subject of any discipline while a member of the armed forces? Another page went on the back. Were you ever the subject of, were you ever named as a defendant in a civil suit? Include dissolutions and divorces. And more information. I didn't want to put it all down there. Boy, I didn't want to put it all down there. I knew they wouldn't get all of it. But you convinced me that I better, because I would build failure into that bar examination the minute I stopped being straight. So I finally got it all down on paper and wrapped it all up with twine and sent it up there, and they let me take the test. I sat downtown Los Angeles that summer in 1975 for 3 days, scribbling like crazy with a couple of thousand other people. And then I had to wait 4 months to find out if I'd passed. I didn't do that a day at a time, I'll tell you. But I got a call on Thanksgiving Eve from a guy I sponsored that worked in the cold type room at the Herald Examiner, and he said, your name's on the list. I said, what list do you have there? And it was amazing. The next morning was Thanksgiving morning, and I cried at breakfast that day, because there's no way. You know, that's a tough test, and I had never taken it before, and I can't do anything for 4 years anyway. And when I got sober, I didn't even have a license to drive a car, and now the state of California has given me a license to practice law. By that afternoon, I was thinking, you know, they ought to tighten it up to keep those dummies out of here. It's just... that arrogance comes back pretty fast, but I love it. I just love it. It has been a great source of joy and challenge and fun to me. It's been a couple of years went by, and I'm over in the court in Glendale one more time, where I had been so many times before. The Superior Court is on the 2nd floor, and the municipal court where I had been is on the 1st floor, and I was in the Superior Court that day, and they called the case, and I answered ready for the defendant, which was a nice change. And walking out of and took care of whatever it was, and walking out of the courthouse, I walked past the municipal court, where I had stood in front of Ken White so many times. And somebody opened the door to walk out, and I looked down, and there's my replacement standing there in front of him. And I thought, you know, there's no way. There isn't any path. As Joe was saying last night, there's no path from the bridge in Sacramento to the meeting in Texas, and there's no path for me to go from being the defendant in the municipal court to answering ready in the Superior Court. It's only a flight up, but it might as well be light years away, because I'm just a drunk. So I got to sit down, and I want to hear Bob, the next speaker. I just want you to know that my life is rich today. It's full of joy today. I feel extraordinarily fortunate today because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My mama used to say, what will you do when you meet your maker? If she were here today, I could tell her, we already met, Mama. We already met. I meet him every day. Meet him every day. We walk together, and it's got to be the case because I'm just a drunk and I haven't had a drink today. God bless you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.